I'm in my 15th month of command. It's been a time of great accomplishment, actually, but some pretty substantial challenges as well. On the accomplishment side, I don't think we could ever have imagined 2 years ago where we would be today in terms of the development of the Afghan National Security Forces. They have really come a very long way. I just was briefed yesterday, for example, about a corps level operation in RC South, where there were 11,000 troops engaged. Most of them were Afghan. And that operation included not just the Afghan National Army, but Afghan National Police, the Afghan Local Police, the Afghan National Civil Order Police, commando battalions, special operators, and of course we were with them, but we were by far the minority. When I took command, we were just starting transition. This concept of transition that came from the Lisbon Summit in October of 10. That summit produced a roadmap for transition where successive portions of the Afghan map would move into this process of transition where the Afghan National Security Forces would lead security for the Afghan people, ultimately completing by the end of 14. It was just starting when I took command a year ago. Today, 75% of the Afghan population lives in areas across Afghanistan where their security is provided by the Afghan National Security Forces. Now, in some areas, they are the sole security presence in the lives of the Afghans. In some areas, we're still in partnership, but that partnership is getting less and less as they get better and better. As you know, we have been recovering the surge. 10,000 went home last December, and 23,000, the final portion of the surge, just left the theater last week. And that gave us the chance to move to a different form of campaign, a campaign that was less about our main force units and more about the employment of advisors.
But there's been some tense times too.
We have had some challenges. In the latter part of November, in 11, we had the cross-border incident with the Pakistanis. It took us quite a while to recover from that. We had, after the new year, the very unfortunate video that showed up about the urination on dead Taliban. That was followed very shortly with the inappropriate handling of religious materials at Bagram, what some folks would call the so-called Quran burning. As well, then we had the tragedy in Balimbay, the alleged shooting by an American soldier of 17 Afghan civilians.
And let's not forget there's been a real spate of green on blue.
Well, that's right. We call them insider threats. That has really tested the relationship as well. Every one of those is a tragedy. Every one of those is a test of our relationship. And we're really committed to reducing those, reducing the vulnerability as much as we possibly can. And we've taken this to heart. We've worked very, very hard within our own forces to understand what we're facing. But as the military commander, I know that the Taliban seek to infiltrate the Afghan forces. And so if I treat that as the threat and we posture ourselves to protect against that threat, then other reasons why Afghans might wish to do us harm, we'll be able to protect against that. Now, what's really been important as that insider threat has grown, as it has become very important to us every single day here, has been the involvement of the Afghans.
What's been the Afghans' response?
They have really embraced this, from the president down to the troops. They have really embraced this. They have looked very, very hard at the way they vet their troops as they come into the service, the Army and the police. There was an 8-step vetting process, but it was not, frankly, managed very well. And they have really, as we say in the Naval Service, taken a real hard round turn on this thing. They are, in fact, working much harder at the vetting, which is a criminal records check, a drug test, 2 village elders vouching for the character of the individual, and they now go out and make sure that the village elders really exist and they know this person. Plus there's biometric enrollment to see if they've got a bad record. As well, the Afghans have inserted counterintelligence into the equation. They're at the training centers. They're in the units now, and they're watching constantly for either the appearance of someone who doesn't belong in that unit, so they might be an imposter, or someone who's in that unit who's talking about the potential of doing us harm. So they're either an infiltrator, or there's someone who is what we call self-radicalized, and they're talking about their faith in a radical sense and intend because of that to do us harm. They're watching it very closely. Now, just last week, there were 5 arrests of individuals who were ferreted out, who were discovered by the Afghans and arrested by the Afghans with intent to do us harm.
What happens to them now?
They go into criminal prosecution. But the Afghans have either detained or arrested hundreds of troops and police who they believe are either extremists, radicalized, or in fact are enemy infiltrators. You see, what's happened here is the Afghans are going to ultimately be the solution in fighting this insurgency. But the way to do that is for us to partner with them and for us to advise them to be inside their formations. And the enemy recognizes that there's a vulnerability here. If the enemy never wants the Afghan army and police to ultimately be the defeat mechanism in this counterinsurgency, then they have to attack us right along this seam. They have to attack us in a way to separate us because of an absence of trust, or because of threat, or because of vulnerability. If they can separate us from the Afghan National Security Forces, then that is a major advantage to them.
What's that old saying, divide and conquer?
Well, it is. It is. And at a tactical level, it creates mistrust. At an operational level, it perhaps could cause us to change the way we do business. At a strategic level, in the capitals of the 50 states that constitute ISAF, there is concern about this. They didn't send their troops here to experience this. They didn't send their troops here to be killed. So we need to understand this problem. I'm embracing it as an enemy attempt to infiltrate the ranks. And if I take the measures necessary to protect our forces from an enemy attack from inside the formation, then much else will be taken care of by those measures.
Sir, some folks are saying that Afghanistan is in the crossroads. Issues of security, politics, economics, culture, people. What do you say?
Well, we've, I think, delivered the country to a point where the people have choices, where there is real opportunity. This country has suffered through more than 30 years of chaos and war. And many of the institutions that are just natural in our lives, many of the institutions of governance that we live with every day in a functioning society were destroyed. Whether it was initially the communist coup, or the Soviet invasion, or the Civil War which followed the Soviet invasion, which was particularly destructive, or the emergence of the Taliban, or the 11 plus years that we have been here. The country really is just getting on its feet. And it's just getting on its feet because of the accomplishments of our and their security forces. You know, nothing can happen if there isn't security. And I talk to the Afghan generals. They will say to me that we have delivered Afghanistan to a point where the people have a choice. And what that means is the follow-through for the price that has been paid in the blood of the Afghan National Security Forces, and certainly the blood of our forces, isn't about more security, it's about governance now. This is really the chance.
How is the Afghan government these days?
Well, there is the government, and then there's the governance.
Right.
The government is the verb. The governance is what they do with that. Again, remember, 30 years. Most of these institutions were destroyed, and they've only really begun to emerge.
Sir, do most Afghans recognize that they're part of a national fabric?
They're beginning to. For many years, of course, you survived because you were a member of a tribe. And that tribe took care of you because there was no real government in your life. That tribe took care of you during the Soviet era. That tribe took care of you during the Civil War. It took care of you during the darkness of the Taliban. And so now what we're saying to the Afghan people is recognize that you're not Pashtun, and within the Pashtun context, one of many different tribes. You're not an Uzbek, you're not a Tajik, you're not a Herati, you are an Afghan. Now that comes hard, but increasingly the young Afghans, the ones who are really for the first time experiencing access to education and who are facing the potential of a real future where war and chaos isn't the coin of the realm for them, so to speak, the immediate first stimulus in their life every morning when they get up. They really have a future. And so they see themselves, while they still recognize that they're Tajik or Uzbek or Pashtun, they do see themselves as Afghans.
Let me segue now into a strategic question. You're using, or you're moving to more of the SFATs, the Security Force Assistance Teams, and the brigades.
We recognized, for two reasons, because our numbers were coming down, but more importantly because the Afghan forces had arrived at a point where it was time that advisors were going to be the factor in the campaign that would accelerate their capabilities. So back in April, we began to see the first Security Force Assistance Teams begin to come into the battle space. But they were purpose-built teams. What we've now done, and to General Odierno, to his credit and the Army's great credit, frankly, and General Dave Rodriguez at FORCECOM, they're building Security Force Assistance Brigades. So the entire brigade comes in together, it trains together, it works up together, it deploys together. There's a brigade commander and a brigade staff, and then the teams are dispersed across the battle space in a particular area and inserted ultimately into the Afghan formation. So there's a real unit coherence now to the advisory effort in the context of a Security Force Assistance Brigade. And they're the next phase, if you will, the next evolution in the process of advising.
I've seen you now in 2 9/11 ceremonies over here, and I think you've been in 4 while you've been deployed. The cost for this war is high.
I'm extraordinarily attentive to the cost of the force, to the force. So I'm constantly watching out for the small unit leadership efforts on behalf of the force to ensure that our troops, soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, are led in the very best way they possibly can be, that our leaders understand their mission, that these leaders are leading by example and leading from the front. That gives purpose to the mission, it gives purpose to our young soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, to the joint force in accomplishing the mission. But I know there's a cost for the families, and God bless the families. We couldn't make it out here if it wasn't for the families. And I think our services have done really a magnificent job in preparing the families for us to deploy and for supporting the families when we are deployed. And I think that has helped to reduce the cost. But the cost is high nonetheless. It's high for those who are in their 4th, 5th, or 6th tour overseas. It's high for the families back home. But these missions have been very, very important to the security of the United States. And I think you would find, when you ask the young troops of the Joint Force, that they believe it has been worth it.
We traveled around through RC East. You went to a number of briefings. You got intel and updates from your commanders. What are you hearing?
I'm hearing a message of optimism.
Seriously?
Oh yes, oh yes. Again, with the last 2 years, the passage of time has begun to reveal to us an ANSF that we think is going to be able to get this job done. You know, we have 27 months remaining on this mission. Mm-hmm. That is a lot of time still to develop the Afghan National Security Forces. And so when I go to the east, where there are 2 corps of Afghan forces and 2 police zones and multiple other Afghan units, my commanders are confident that the kinds of integration and planning and execution that has to occur in a credible force, that's present now. Again, we couldn't have imagined it a year ago. And today, routinely, brigade level operations that are integrated with the police and our forces are undertaken on a regular basis. When I go to RC South, we have an exceptional Afghan Corps commander there. He works in very close partnership with General Abrams. As I said, they just had a very successful Corps level operation, RC Southwest, with the British and the Marines. That force drew down a lot when we recovered the surge. But what happened was the Afghan Corps, the 215th Corps, General Malouk commanding, has really accomplished a great deal in covering down on the terrain that was uncovered by the Marines who redeployed home. And so in Southwest, we're seeing levels of cooperation accelerated by the presence of advisors in formations. Now I go to the West, which is an area largely commanded by the Italians and the Spanish, almost in complete security force assistance mode today. And when you go to the province of Herat, that is what I think normal looks like in Afghanistan today. There is complete integration from the governor through the police chief. Now, the challenge that we're beginning to experience in the West and in the North, and I'll get to the North in a moment, is that as we continue to shape and defeat the insurgency, what we're beginning to encounter is the emergence, or perhaps the unveiling, if you will, because it was part of the insurgency anyway, of criminality. And so what that means for us, and of course many insurgencies at the beginning laminate themselves on top of criminal networks. And so what we're doing is we're putting more emphasis in the North and in the West on police activity. Law enforcement now, while we'll still conduct counterinsurgency operations and we'll still chase down the ideological insurgents, the Taliban, it is criminal networks now that occupy the time of the Afghan forces, and so we put emphasis on the police in the West. And in the North, the German-led coalition is also in a security force assistance mode, and they've been very successful. If we think about violence across the country, enemy-initiated attacks, and all violence across all of Afghanistan is 100%, in the North and in the West, it usually totals somewhere between 7 and 8% of all of the North and all of the West across the entire country. So that gives you a sense that a very large amount of the Afghan population today lives with a very little, frankly, small amount of enemy-initiated activity. And so for them, security is much more a factor of law enforcement in their lives necessarily than the Army.
And how is the situation on the border?
All the way around, let me just take you all the way around. In the North, we are bordered by Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan. Afghanistan has had a long-term ancient relationship with all three of those countries, and where they can, they're helpful to the Afghans. But they're extraordinarily careful in their relationships about the cross-border movement of narcotics, human trafficking, gun running. So there are border security issues for those countries in Afghanistan, and the good news is they're talking. Moving to the West, the Iranian border, we don't spend a lot of time on that border, but that's an ancient relationship again between the Afghans and the Persians, if you will, the Iranians. The Pakistani border, depending on where you are, can be a real challenge. The good news is the relationship with Pakistan has gotten better. The not so good news is that the border is very, very difficult terrain. Both sides, the forces on both sides of the border have limited force that they can put against that difficult terrain. But we have found ourselves with the Pakistanis in the last several months in far more agreement on what we need to do along the border than in disagreement. In the North, for example, up around Kunar and Nuristan, we're in very solid agreement on dealing with the Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan, the TTP, which is a threat to both sides. And I say both sides, I mean the Afghans, us on the western border, and western part of the border, and the Pakistanis on the eastern side. You come down the border, and you begin to see groups in the federally administered tribal areas of Pakistan that are a problem for us. They're a security problem, and premier of all of those is the Haqqani network. Now, we need for our friends on the eastern side of the border to do more about the Haqqanis. And we've been told that they will. But the principal threat I deal with in the east of Afghanistan is the Haqqani network. And they are a pretty advanced terrorist criminal network. They have connections into Al-Qaeda, they have connections into the TTP, they have connections into a whole variety of pretty serious terrorist organizations.
What sort of demonstrations from the Pakistanis are you hoping to see?
Well, we're hoping that military operations that they intend to undertake, particularly in North Waziristan, sometime in the winter, we're hoping that those military operations will have effect in a manner that will destabilize or even uproot some of the Haqqani network. Now, you know, we're waiting to see if it'll turn out that way. And then, of course, as you go down the border through South Waziristan and then into Baluchistan, we find the safe havens for the Quetta Shura Taliban. So the border is a challenge for both sides. We have worked hard to understand how we can cooperate across the border, but we need help from Pakistan to deal with some of the terrorist groups that are experiencing the benefits of safe haven. And we're going to continue to work with General Kayani in complementary operations. We operate on our side, he operates on his side, we synchronize them together, and we hope to have combined effects.
Bottom line, sir, everything that we're doing here is so that we can have an Afghanistan that can stand on its own.
That's right.
Are we moving in the right direction? Is it going to happen?
None of it will happen if there's not security. Okay. And so the principal objective of the campaign that we're waging here, that these magnificent troops are engaged in every day, is to build an Afghan national security force, which by 14 is able to take over the security lead across the country. And if we get solid security in the population centers and along the lines of communication, that then gives the Afghans the ability to apply governance to create the opportunity for economic development. At Lisbon in 2010, the roadmap was to create a security environment where the Afghans had hope. And that security environment is well on its way. It's not perfect. We got a lot of fighting still to do. We got a lot of development of the Afghan national security forces to do. But last year, there was a really important conference, and it was called Bonn 2. Germans sponsored it. And the international community, not just ISAF, but the international community went to Bonn, and they pledged their support for Afghanistan after the roadmap for Lisbon was completed. And so on the 1st of January 2015, and for 10 years thereafter, we will all seek to help Afghanistan develop in something called the Decade of Transformation. So the roadmap for transition, which is about security, will be followed by the Decade of Transformation. And what happened in July was really important. The international community went to Tokyo, where they met and they talked about the development of Afghanistan. And at Tokyo, the international community pledged about $16 billion of development money and assistance for Afghanistan during this decade of transformation. But the deal with the international community was that the President Karzai and his government would take the necessary reforms, embrace the rule of law, and root out corruption so that the governance really is the government. And I think that that's a very positive thing.
Are we winning?
That's not a word really that you can apply in the sense of the wars that we fought in the past. Winning implies that often winning implies that there is some form of cataclysmic battle.
Black and white.
And the outcome is very easily discernible as a win, as a victory. For us in this campaign, success is moving the Afghan national security forces fully and completely into the lead so that they are the defeat mechanism of the Taliban. They are the ones that become the means for security in the lives of the Afghan people. They are the ones, when the Afghan people think about heroes, they think about the Afghan national security forces of today. So people ask me sometimes, Alan, when in the campaign are you going to shift the main effort from the south to the east? And I tell them that's not the question. What's happening right now is shifting of the main effort. We have been the main effort in this campaign for a long time. Today, we are shifting the main effort to the Afghan National Security Forces. They will become the main effort. We will become the supporting effort. They will lead the campaign. We will support them in that process. They become the defeat mechanism of the Taliban. They create the security space within which real governance can begin to take root. The people have economic hope, and that is winning. Now, it's not going to happen tomorrow. And the chances are, even well into the decade of transformation, the Afghan National Security Forces are going to be fighting some aspect of this insurgency. As long as there are safe havens in Pakistan, there's probably going to be an insurgency. But I believe that the Afghan National Security Forces, as they are evolving today, will be able to handle that. What I hope will happen is that this question that you and I explored a few moments ago about the quality of governance, if the quality of governance can deliver choice to the people, can deliver an improved quality of life, the rule of law, opportunity for education, medical care, freedom of movement around the country, a job, if the governance can deliver that to the Afghan people, and have done so because the Afghan National Security Forces sacrificed and fought so well to deliver it, then that will be winning.